What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Gen Z Money Podcast, where we turn financial peace to your reality. I'm your host, James Bowman, and today, man, oh man, did I have an awesome guest come on. I brought on Joe from the Stacking Benjamins podcast. I mean, we went over so many different things, whether it's budgeting, whether it's getting out of that survival mindset, what he thinks about debt, and just so many different things. We went over taxes, inflation, all of the things people get wrong about these very complicated subjects. I mean, it was awesome. I mean, we went over, he's got a book, which I'm going to link to in the show notes. And we're going to talk a lot about that he and a co-author put out called Stacked, and he goes over all of these things we talked about today in the book. But I just wanted to bring them on, man, and talk about these things in depth because they are so misunderstood by the general public. Okay, so I know I'm 100% sure you are going to get at least one good thing out of this podcast. Honestly, you might get 100, but I guarantee you'll get at least one. But without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and jump right into the interview. What's going on, Joe? Welcome to the Gen Z Money Podcast, man. How you doing today?
Dude, I'm so happy to be here. I've got my coffee, ready to hang out with James.
I appreciate you coming on, man. It's a little early on a Sunday for at least for me.
It's funny. I was actually playing some Forza on Xbox before this, so you're interrupting my game.
Is it the new one?
It is the new one. And you know, I never wanted to go to Mexico. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like going to Mexico and I've been a few times, but this game is all set in Mexico and it makes me just want to go right now. Like I want to go discover different parts of Mexico. It does a great job. So congratulations, Forza, for working with the Mexican tourism department or something. I don't know.
Go over there and start racing some cars, man. You'll be all right.
They might not like me then, right?
So, Joe, the reason I brought you on, man, you've got so much great content when it comes to financial independence and helping people end up building wealth. So I'm really excited that you said that you wanted to come on and, you know, to talk about all these different things. You've got your own podcast that I'm sure we're going to get into. You've got your own book that we're going to get into, and just all of these different resources. So I love to bring you on and just, you know, put your resources out to my listeners as well to link them up.
Well, thanks, man. The thing that is always frustrating for me is when I hear creators say, well, isn't the space saturated? Like, aren't there too many people? If you take your podcast, my podcast, all the podcasts out there, all the YouTube channels out there that talk about money, all the books out there about money, you know, let's just start with podcasts. Dave Ramsey, who probably I'd say is the bajillion pound gorilla in our space, right? Mm-hmm. People say he doesn't report his numbers, but people say that he has between 1 and 2 million listeners a week, between 1 and 2. So you take him, you take everybody, maybe there's 35 million people listening to podcast about money that are teaching people to do better with their money. There's 330 million people in the United States, James. Mm-hmm. Nobody's listening. And you can see it around you, right? So people are blowing money on stupid stuff all the time. People are not able to pay the rent. There's a study that I read recently by this group called nonfiction called The Secret Financial Lives of Americans. Talks about how 7% of us say that we've eaten food out of a dumpster because we were hungry and we didn't know where else to turn. Another piece of the study says that over 150 million people say that they've cried about their money. I was certainly there in the early 90s. So, you know, whatever any of us can do, if anybody in your audience is listening and thinking, hey, should I be talking about this with our people? Absolutely, man, because we're still leaving too many people behind.
It's crazy that, you know, you bring up those real numbers because I never really looked into it. 35 million compared to 300 million, but you also got to think that's just in the United States.
Right.
If we go globally, everyone in every single country, you need some type of financial literacy in order to be successful in some sort of way. Therefore, that number, not only does it look bad on the United States population, but when you take it globally, that's insane. That's
When you think
insane.
about the level of education we have versus in a lot of other countries, yeah.
Mm.
Think about, I have friends that are from India and I don't know, and visiting Southeast Asia. Yeah, I'm with you. Just education globally, but it's an exciting
Mm.
opportunity. We
Mm.
can look at it as the glass is only one quarter full, or we can look at it as this big opportunity for us to have some fun and joke around and play, be more playful about money. Because
Mm.
frankly, I do think that's where it starts. Like, it doesn't have to be heavy. It doesn't have to be I don't know, some of these money geeks that you and I know, they want to have that deep conversation about money, and
Mm.
everybody around them's like, no, no, thank you. Like, pass. I do not want to go there. So I think it gives us a lot of room to bring more people on.
Yeah, it's got such a wide spectrum of involvement you can have. For example, if you just want to be a completely passive investor, there are index funds, but then you've got people who day trade and they're reading all these charts. And there's a big, big middle ground between the two. So
Right.
you can go as deep as you want to go, but at least for me personally, I don't want to. I'd rather spend my time elsewhere, but still knowing the basics and getting the basics out to people is where I really like to focus. And I don't want to get too far down the investing hole because I talk about that like every podcast, but like the content you're putting out, especially with the book and stuff like that, it goes way further than investing. It takes it way back to the pure basics, the budgeting, the debt, inflation, taxes. And that's what I really wanted to focus on because I don't really talk about that stuff as much as I should because those are the things that affect 100% of people.
Yeah.
Anybody listening to this, having a budget affects them. Inflation, taxes, debt, all of that affects them. Let's just say in the US population, let's just say 50% actually invest in something. Then my content on investing is only relevant to that 50%. So this episode is for the 100%. This is one everyone can listen to and everyone can take bits and pieces out of to implement in their life.
It's funny that you say that because people have asked, they're like, okay, so where's the crypto in the book? Where are the NFTs in the book? Because that's the hot stuff right now. And this is, I believe that our book Stacked is about giving yourself the foundation so that no matter what investment strategies, whether it's crypto, whether it's stocks, whether it's real estate, whatever it is, that you've got a foundation that you don't get smoked while you're doing it. What really frustrates me about many crypto and NFT investors, if I just go down that road for a second, is that it doesn't feel like, James, that they're interested in how it works. They're interested in hitting the lottery, and we all have seen the statistics that lottery winners by percentage go broke more often than other people. So if you have this huge amount of money that you've been given, right, that you won, how the hell are you going broke? Well, I'll tell you why. Because you never had any basics. You don't have any budget. You don't have any structure. So what I wanted to do is exactly what you're talking about. Help people build that structure in a fun way, so that no matter what your investment of choice ends up being, that you don't end up blowing up your own strategy. I was a financial planner for 16 years. And the problem that I saw was not like having the right diet or the right workout plan, so to speak. In other words, not having the right financial strategy. It's that we blow up our own strategy. We would totally go, yeah. I heard that I should only rebalance my funds once a year, but don't you think we should do it now instead? I'm like, no, we should do every study on earth. And then, then the person would go, well, I think this time's different. It feels different. Well, it's always felt different, as you know, because you talk about investing a lot. Every day feels like it's different than history, but we can still learn a lot from that stuff.
Yeah, and there's always something new. And
Yeah.
and to kind of, go with what you were saying, I think a lot of it has to do with we are in, besides, I guess, the most recent times and with the corona shift or whatever, but we have been in the longest bull market in history. And so a lot of wealth has been created over the last 10 years. So with all this wealth coming in, if people are not managing it properly, it's gonna stay in the hands of what people call the ultra wealthy.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
and it gives people this surplus of money to make those gambling bets when it comes to, because I mean, I don't want to get too far down the crypto and NFT thing, because I'm going to make a episode purely on that, my opinion on it, the research
Oh,
I've done
cool.
and all that.
Yeah.
But with the influx of people, the people are making more than they ever have. People are getting the better returns than the best returns they've ever gotten. They're always looking for that next step to beef up that return and beef it up and beef it up and beef it up. And so I think that's what's kind of fueling this bull run in the crypto NFT space. So, but Joe, let's take it back, right? Let's go to little Joe, like 6-year-old Joe, right? It was like 2 days ago.
I
So
was going to say, there's some people that say that my maturity level, I have not progressed that far from that.
so how was money talked about in your household as you grew up?
Yeah, we didn't talk about money, James. We didn't talk about money at all, in fact, and it was really taboo. Whenever my parents, I grew up in a middle-class family. My dad worked for General Motors. My mom worked off and on for different companies. And it always seemed like her goal was to be a stay-at-home mom, but because they struggled with money off and on, she would go back and take a job for a while and then leave the job to be stay-at-home mom and then come back. But whenever they would talk about money, my brother, my sister, I'm the oldest of three. Whenever my brother and my sister or I would walk into the room, they would make us leave. They would immediately tell us, this is not for kids. We had to leave. So when I went to college, I went to the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina. And when I got there, I had never had a bunch of money in my hand. I had no idea about credit. I didn't know anything about finance at all. So I walk into their student union, Mark Clark Hall, and there was a table there, and they were offering, there was this long line. I don't remember if it was like a Frisbee or a pizza or what the deal was, but you could get an American Express card. You could get your butt into debt was pretty much what it was. And by the way, that's outlawed now. You can't do that. Credit card companies, there's rules about college and credit cards. However, they have new tactics today that they use. So, but I stand in this line. Now I'm at a military college, so I can't have a job. So I can't, there's my ability to pay a bill is going to be zero, but that doesn't stop American Express. 3 weeks later, I got this beautiful green card. I have no idea how it works. The first time we get leave on a weekend, we go to North Charleston, we go to this mall, and we go to this high-end restaurant you might have heard of called Ruby Tuesday. Don't know if you've ever heard of it. They have like a salad bar and everything. It's amazing. But there were 6 of us. And I remember the bill comes, and me being the baller with a credit card, I go, lunch is on me, guys. And I was the coolest guy with all my friends. So I bought that. Then I go down to the other end of the mall to Nordstrom, because I can't go to the second most expensive store in the mall. I got to go to the most expensive store, right? So I go there, and I see on this mannequin this sweater. And I was in college in the 80s, and Duran was big. And this thing was Duran Beautiful. Like, it's this purple sweater with this paisley thing around the neck. Like, it is. And I still have it in my closet. Just to remind myself of what a dingus I was. But I buy this sweater. Now, once again, let me remind everybody, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina. There's like 2 cold days a year, right? Number one. Number two is I'm in a military college. I can't even wear a sweater, James. I got to wear a uniform, but I bought it. But that's not the sad part. The sad part is, of course, maybe 3 weeks later, I go to, there was no electronic stuff then. You had to walk to get your mail. And it was always fun to see if somebody sent you mails. Is my friend's going to send me something? Is my girlfriend going to send me a note? If somebody got something? And I remember, because you could see through the little glass, that there was a note for me. And I open up the mailbox, and it's American Express. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I get to hear from American Express. And the thing I'd never thought about was there. They sent me a bill for all this stuff that I bought. And I'm like, what the heck is this? American Express. I thought we had a relationship. Like, I thought I got the card. You were going to help me, but no, you're going to make me pay for all this stuff. And if you know American Express, most of their cards, the basic card, you got to pay it off in full. Like it isn't a line of credit. You pay it off every month. So I did what any smart person would do. I called my mom and I said, Mom, we got a problem. And she's like, no, you've got a problem. And what's sad is now, in all, it was probably $200 maybe, that I had on that card, but I had zero way to pay it. My mom refused to help me pay it. And I ended up with no card about 90 days later, destroyed my credit. The second I got to college, my credit was destroyed. And I worked that summer when I went back home to work with a collection agency to pay that thing off. Cause now it wasn't $200 anymore. It was like 320 or 340, there was this monster interest. So very expensive lesson learned because we didn't talk about money. To answer your question the longest way possible, we didn't talk about it at all. And I became a money disaster because of that. And then in the 90s, I got my financial act together after a series of just messing up, finally realized that I had to put a foundation in place.
So when you call your mom, right? And you're like, Mom, this is what happened. I messed up. And she's like, hey, deal with it. On one hand, I think like, yes, deal with it, Joe. But on another hand, did at that time, was she willing to like, okay, now it's time to teach him about finances? Or did she kind of just like back off and say, Joe, you got to figure this out on your own?
I think that two things. I think number one was that because I was college age and I had messed up, it was a time to learn. It was going to be an expensive lesson. Number two was, very frankly, I think they were still struggling with money on their own because they always did off and on. And I don't think, her taking $350 to help me pay off my debt was also going to be a struggle for her. So I think it was actually, it was both.
Gotcha. And I find it kind of ironic that you say like that's an expensive lesson, but now, I mean, back then I guess it was, but now when students are going into college taking on hundreds of $1,000s in student loans,
yeah,
your lesson seems I take your lesson. I take your lesson 10 days a week, 3 times a day, man. Because
totally agree. Absolutely. Well, but the bad thing for me was though, James, I didn't learn from that lesson. And I remember, so that was what, 1987, 1996. I have 2 young twins. My wife is still in school on student loans, and I am still a disaster with money. And at this time, I'm a young financial planner. So I am teaching other people how to manage their money, and I'm still a disaster on my end, which, by the way, there's a chapter at the end of my book about who to hire and how to surround yourself with good people. I didn't know any of that, and I was not the person that you should have hired. I could talk a great game, but I could not implement anything because I didn't do what I was telling other people to do. So I remember I was at a meeting across town. I was in the Detroit area, and I was down near Ann Arbor, where the University of Michigan is. And I lived in the northern suburbs, way across town, probably 45 miles, 50 miles away. And I ran out of gas. And I had this old rusty minivan because it's all I could afford. And I had already tapped family members for loans that I had no idea how to pay back. I had no credit anymore. I had gotten credit once after that and wrecked that. Actually twice I got in credit and had wrecked that. And I had no money. Anyway, I had no money. I had no resources. I had nobody to call. And I quoted earlier that statistic about crying about money. This is when I cried about money, was that I'm digging through the seat cushions looking for change so that I can walk almost a mile to this Marathon gas station and beg this dude. And I still remember this guy did not want to give me the little plastic gas can to take back because he thought I was going to steal it. And I thought, number one, what a charlatan I am, because I'm teaching our people about money and I'm not doing any of it myself. Number two, I'm at this point where I don't even know how the hell I'm going to get home. I found 85 cents. I have no idea how I made it home. Like that day, like how I drove as far as I did on 85 cents. No clue. Cause all I wanted to do was get closer, but I made it back. But the that day I decided things really need to change because I couldn't answer the phone anymore because of creditors. You go to family events and I owed everybody money, and it was absolutely horrible. And it was that day that I decided, number one, I need to practice what I preach. Number two, what I preach is about automating things, hiding money from yourself, only use credit when you know how dangerous it is, only get into debt when you know how dangerous it is and you have a strategy on how to pay it back, and surrounding yourself with the right people. Like now I have this thing. I want to be the dumbest person in the room, James. If I walk into a room, I want to surround myself with people that are smarter than me, no matter what I do. And that might not mean paying a financial planner, but it might mean like listening to podcasts like yours, that reading the right stuff, surrounding myself with people that are also going places, finding people that are kind of a little bit further down the path than I am, taking them to breakfast, picking their brain. You have to have this winning team if you're going to get ahead. And man, it was funny when I changed everything about my approach. I thought this hole that I'm in is going to take forever to dig out of. Cause at this point, it was no longer 200, $300. I was nearly six figures in debt. I was around $95,000 in debt. That was all back debt. It was all this old debt. And, cleaning that up, I thought was going to take forever. What was amazing was once I got my foundation, how quickly I paid it off. About 5 years.
Okay, so Joe, let me ask you this, because you were a financial planner, so you knew what you needed to do from an early time.
Yeah.
Like you knew the steps to take. The reason I ask this question is because a lot of people, like for example, everyone knows what it takes to lose weight. You have to eat less calories than you burn. You have to exercise, all the tactical stuff. Not everybody is willing to do it. It's kind of the same thing about money. I think everybody knows the basics of money. Everyone knows you need to live on less than you make. Everyone knows you need to, keep debt lower than what you can afford. With that being said, you knew all of these steps and you were actually teaching other people these steps at the time. So what was it in you that was stopping you from doing it?
It isn't what you know, it's what you do. And what most of us do is we focus on this. How can we do this quickly? Like what's the magic bullet? I see it in our podcast downloads. I'm sure you see it in your podcast downloads. People cherry pick episodes based on what it's called. And the get rich quick ones, the ones that where you think you're going to get rich quick, are the ones that more people listen to. And I thought there was this magic bullet. I thought there was this magical thing that people knew that I didn't know, that was the true success that I didn't have. There is none. And you just have to put in the hard work. And I wasn't putting in the hard work. It's the same. I mean, your question is a lot like asking, why don't I lose weight? Why don't you lose weight? And you ask yourself that every day. And that's the other thing is that I think that, and this is true with weight loss too, we shame ourselves so much by every day going, you know what, I'm a disaster with money. And then you go, well, you know what, one more day, I'm already a disaster. What's today? Like if I'm on a diet, what's a pint of ice cream going to matter today? I'm already fatter than I want to be, and we do this negative self-talk thing. And I had to stop all that. I had to give myself some grace and go, you know what? The best time to plant a tree probably was 10 years ago, but I can't plant a tree 10 years ago. So I'm going to plant one right now. And I'm going to decide that today is the day. I will tell you, there was just a switch in my brain. There was a switch in my brain that day that said, I'm not this person anymore. The past is not Joe today. Today, Joe's a different person, and I'm going to walk down a different aisle. So I don't know what the actual answer is to your question. Like, what is it? Like if we can pick that lock for so many people, that would be fantastic. All I know was I just got to a point where I couldn't do it anymore. And whenever I interview people, most people have had that aha moment. And maybe it's not as, running out of gas and finding 85 cents moment, but most people have this decision time in their life where they go, I don't know what it was. Just one day I go, I'm not doing this anymore. And it's a pretty powerful day.
Yeah, and you mentioned Dave Ramsey earlier. Of course, I listen to his show because he drops a lot of great nuggets. Even though I don't believe everything he teaches, but he said something. It's like when you're sick and tired of being sick and tired is when you make the change,
Yeah.
and that resonated with me. It resonates in my story. I hear it resonating in your story with 85 cents for some gas, and I think a lot of people. What I would like in a perfect world is for people to be able to listen to your story, and instead of making the change when it happens to you, make the change because you see it happen to someone else.
Yeah.
So
Agreed.
you hear Joe's story and you're like, you know what? I never want to get there, so I'm making the change today. But unfortunately, that's just not human nature. You can look at someone who, let's just who smokes cigarettes. You can see that they die of lung cancer, but it's not gonna, in most people, it's not going to activate something within themselves until something drastic actually happens to them. Because everybody looks around and say, that won't be me. That won't be me who ends up 600 pounds. That won't be me who goes bankrupt. So and that's why I ask it, because it's like some people might have gotten to that moment and they missed it, and
Yeah.
they didn't decide to make the change. So and that's kind of where that question comes from, because I want people to be able to listen and realize, like, okay, I don't want to get to where he got to, so I'm going to make the change today. So okay, so let's get into let's talk a little bit more about your book, Joe. The first thing that really intrigued me was the idea of looking at budgeting like Tetris, because everybody has played Tetris. Not everybody is good at Tetris. Okay, one of us on this call is good at Tetris, and it's not you. So, so how did you come up with that idea? Because the way you describe it is like, it's like the eureka moment. It's like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, that's exactly what it is. So can you go ahead and describe that a little bit of how
Yeah.
you put those pieces together?
Yeah. And actually, I'll widen that just for everybody for just a second. I believe very strongly, and this is where Tetris and a lot of the stuff in the book comes in, that if you gamify your financial picture, you do two things. First thing you do is you decrease the heat level, right? We talk about people crying about their money, or this has to be a big thing. And when you decrease the heat, you become more open to making mistakes. And you're going to make a few mistakes. And if you hit your head against the wall a few times, you're going to learn not to do that. Or to your point, if you hear about other mistakes people make. So we talk a lot about, Emily, my co-author, and we talk about a lot of mistakes that we've made during our financial lives, so that we just make it, mistakes are going to be a part of the process. But gamifying, it's huge. I think it's huge. And you look at gamification for bad as an example. I'll tell you gamification for bad. Robinhood, the app, not the guy that steals from the rich to give to the poor, but this app that steals from the average person to put money in their pockets. I'm not a big Robinhood fan. Robinhood gamifies to make you do something that you should not do, which is treat trading like a casino. And they actually got sued. And this is gamification in a bad way. They got sued for confetti that would fall when you made, for a lot of people, a bad decision, right? But they're encouraging you, hey, go ahead and make more of these decisions, because we get paid every time that you trade a stock. So, but most of the time, gamification is fantastic. And one thing that Emily and I both have done with our budgets is turn it into a game. So, and this is actually Emily's story, not mine. Emily realized that taking your units that you get paid, if you make it $10 units, $50 units, 100, whatever it is, and you turn them into little blocks, it's like Tetris. And you've got this line, if you've ever played Tetris before, you get to this certain line, you're out of space, right? So everybody's got a line with their budget. I only make X amount of money. So you have your line there. How do I take these different blocks of money that I spend money on and make them fit? And doing it that way, both she and I before that were using for our budget a little game that was more like a thermometer, where you've got X amount of money and you do the thermometer. I'll tell you what we both like about Tetris better is that there are certain block pieces that are more important for you than others. A mistake that I think most people make with their budget is they think a budget stops them from doing all the cool stuff they really want to do. Well, with budgeting Tetris, if we start off with those things we want to do and budget for those first and put those blocks in my Tetris board first, now I build the other blocks around the stuff I want to do. So if it's important for me to go out to dinner twice a week, then I put those as my Tetris blocks that are first. If it's important for me to take a vacation once a year and I got to put money toward that every paycheck, well, then I put that block in first, like before anything. And then I put the other stuff, the not so fun stuff, right? The groceries, the utility bill, the gas for the car, all those things. I put those blocks in afterward. So I think that turning it into a game helps people start off with what the fun stuff is that I want to do rather than omitting those things, which is what too many people do or think that they need to do to have a good budget.
I kind of like your perspective on it, even though we're not necessarily on the same page with that. I can understand how that definitely shifts your mindset because, like you just said earlier, gamification is a big thing, and your budget gives you permission to spend, right? And I've always been a proponent of, and it might be because I grew up in like low income, therefore money was scarce, and the necessities always came first. And that's the way I teach people is like every block has a different value for each person. So for example, your rent should be paid before you take your family out to eat, right? But with your mindset, it's like, okay, if you tell yourself like, listen, I'm taking my family out to eat twice a month, and then the rent has to be paid, you're putting the joy in front of the necessity, which it kind of negates the necessity. Like it's already going to be done. It's a big block. It's already got its space. Now I'm working for the joys. I'm working for the joys because the big blocks have already taken their spot essentially.
Well, and here is why I like that approach is because of the fact that if you don't build the joy into your life, if you don't build the stuff you like in, it will still find a way. It will find a way. If you're eating rice and beans and living in a tent in somebody else's backyard because you're trying to save as much money as you can, you're sucking all the joy out of your life, you're going to do that for 3 months and you're going to go, hey, I did it for 3 months. Let's go buy a big screen TV. And then you blow your entire budget because you deserve a 70-inch TV, OLED, 4K, all the big stuff. You need a really good one. And so what I found is if you build these little things in all the time, you avoid this boom bust cycle that people get into where they're great for 3 months and then they just blow it. Look at, one effective, you and I were talking about diets earlier. Think about a diet that's helped a lot of people lose weight, which is where they have 6 days on the diet. Then they have their quote cheat day, right? And cheat day where they eat whatever they want. The funny thing is when I've done that diet, I used that at a time when I really needed to lose some big weight, and it worked. And what was kind of funny was that I learned after a while, like anybody who's done that diet, cheat day sucks. Like cheat day is not good. Like I would think about all the crap that I wanted to eat for 6 days. And on that 7th day, I go to Dunkin' Donuts in the morning because I love donuts. I would have just the nastiest carb loaded day. And by the end of the day and the whole next day, I felt like crap. And now I realize that food is a fuel and I need to build in things that I like in moderation during the day. So I don't have this boom bust. So the boom bust thing can work, but it is so suboptimal for me to instead every day wake up and be excited about every single day and go, hey, I'm going to do this fun thing, this fun thing, this fun thing. And guess what? I know I can afford all of that. And it gets rid of that thing in my head, that escape valve. It makes sure the escape valve doesn't go off. And I don't make some big stupid purchase because I was depriving myself.
Yeah, what it seems like is it takes you out of that survival instinct.
Yeah.
It takes you out of that. How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to provide food for my children? How am I going to whatever? And instead you're thinking, well, how am I going to take my family on vacation this year. And
Yeah.
it just shifts the mindset from survival to like, how am I going to thrive? Not how am I
Yes.
going to survive? How am I going to thrive? I love it. I love it. It's a different perspective from me personally, like I said, but I can definitely see how that works because the boom bust thing you just talked about, it doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah.
Some people it works for, some people it doesn't.
Well, and one more thing on this too. Don't get me wrong. There are people when I was a financial planner, and I know there's people that listen to our podcast, your podcast, my podcast, that are in a survival spot, right? Where this idea of taking family on a vacation is like, come on, give me a break, right? I can barely do anything. But what I've always found is that there's two opportunities. Opportunity number one is to think more closely about what you value and spend money on those things and cut the things that you don't value. And whenever I'd sit down with somebody that was really in a struggle, they were often spending money on things they didn't value. And if that didn't make the cut, there's a second thing to do, which is this is a time to think about your income streams. How can I make more money? Because studies show as an example that your boss wants to give you a raise, but most of us have never asked. And if we have asked, we haven't really asked in the right way. And we're seeing the great resignation now all around us. And I know that you and I probably will talk about inflation at some point. Inflation right now is through the roof. And if you're not getting a raise right now, you're falling behind because your money from your paycheck is not going as far as it did a year ago. So you got to get a raise just to keep up. But getting a raise, having a side hustle, bringing in multiple streams of income. I was talking last week to a woman named Nicole Lappin, who a lot of people might know. She was one of the youngest anchors on CNN. I think she was 22 when she was an anchor on CNN. Now she's a big money guru. She's got a new book out called Miss Independent, which teaches women to be more independent with their money. I was talking to Nicole Lappin. You know how many different income streams she has, James? She has 10. She has 10 different ways that she makes money. And her whole point was she was so paranoid about survival. She's got this great survival story with her parents. Her dad committed suicide after being in trouble a lot. Her mom has been in jail multiple times. She had this childhood that was just wreaked with havoc. So she was always in survival mode. And her way to get out of that was, I can't rely on one person or one job. I got to have these multiple streams of income to make sure that I've got things coming in. So if you can't cut anymore, and even if you can, I sometimes think the better thing to do with your budget is to find ways to earn more money. And for a lot of people that's scary, but those are two things for people in survival mode right now.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It comes to the fact like, okay, if you cut everything from your budget, you go from 100% spending to zero. If you increase your income, you can double it. You can triple it. You can quadruple it. You can infinitely
Sky's the limit. Yeah.
You can infinitely increase your income 1,000%. You can only cut so much. So
one of my favorite quotes is, you can't shrink your way to greatness too. And I always think about that. When people have a cut mentality, I don't want to have a cut mentality. I don't want to cheapen my life. I do want to look for more and better. And that doesn't mean more stuff, right? That doesn't mean that I need a yacht. You know, it just means that if I'm going to live a great, fulfilling life, I should be about, what does that mean to me? And how do I make it more? But having this cut mentality, no thanks.
Yeah, because then you start cutting the things that bring you joy, and that's when you end up going down the wrong road. That's why they say money doesn't buy you happiness, is because if you're not getting the things that really bring you happiness, then the money doesn't matter.
Agreed. Some of the most miserable people I work with when I was a financial planner were the wealthiest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that all the time. So the next chapter I kind of want to get into, and it's mainly because of the title. The title of the chapter is Debt, Driving a Moped Down a Dirt Road to Hell. So instantly, when somebody reads the title of that chapter, you get negative thoughts. Like, there's a lot of, first of all, I don't want to ride a moped. I don't want to be on a dirt road, and I don't like where I'm going. So let's break it down, Joe. What is your opinion on debt?
I don't think there's any such thing as good debt. You'll hear people tell you there's good debt and there's bad debt. There is no good debt. Debt is always bad. However, there are degrees of bad, and there are also people that use debt as a tool to help them get ahead more quickly. So debt can be an effective tool, but it's not your friend. And the people that loan your money ain't your buddy, as my sergeant at the Citadel used to tell me. I'm not your buddy. Like, he'd help us with something, and we'd go to thank him. He's like, I ain't your buddy. And I know that because he made me do tons of push-ups during that time. But debt, when it comes to debt, I think the first thing I had to do, I'll tell my own story. First thing I had to do, because I got into debt early, like I said, was have a healthy respect for it, that this is going to kick my ass. And instead of that, I need to back up and I need to live a cash only lifestyle. Because once I get a healthy respect for a dollar and I realize how important these dollars are in my wallet or in my bank account and what they can do for me, only then do I realize the real truth, which is that when it comes to debt, it's a zero-sum game. If I owe you money, James, on your balance sheet, I'm an asset. Where on my balance sheet, you're a liability, meaning I got to pay you the money. So you're getting more, and I've got the other side of that equation. So I would much rather loan you money than borrow money from you. And if I can do that, and I'm in a spot where, hey, other people owe me money. And that's actually great for your career too. Let's just take money out of the equation, right? In a career, if you have people that owe you favors, like, that is the best place to be. And everybody knows that, right? Be a giver, give it to as many people as you possibly can, help as many people as you possibly can. And if you're in a spot where somebody owes you later, oh, what a wonderful place to live. And plus this idea of helping other people. But when you're in debt, you're beholden to other people, and you can't set the terms of your life. The terms are laid out for you. So there's no flexibility with debt. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can pay them off quicker, but you've got these minimum terms that if you don't make it, your life is going to be hell like mine was. So in a nutshell, I'm anti-debt. I think that you look at there's another guy, Wes Moss, who's in Atlanta. He's he's got this great radio show in Atlanta. He actually has been doing talk radio about money longer than Dave Ramsey has. And Wes has a new book called What the Happiest Retirees Know. The happiest, wealthiest people have an aversion to debt, even though they can afford the payments. They've done the math. Like, there's a lot of people that do the math. Like, listen, if I borrow money at 2% and I'm making 8%, well, then I should probably do that. These people aren't dumb. They know that. And they still pay off their mortgage early. They still stay away from other people's money. So I'm anti-debt. That does not mean that you can't get ahead using other people's money. And when I see people doing great things, sometimes they are. And I'll give you another personal example. My son is 26 and is buying his 10th and 11th rental house right now. He's building his real estate empire, and he's doing it using other people's money. He's using something called the Burr method. And the Burr method, where you buy, you then rehab the house, you then refinance it, you rent it first, you refinance it for less than that monthly payment that they're giving to you, the renter's giving to you. So the renter's making the payment on the debt, and you take the money out of the house to go buy the next one. He's got this thing, but he and I have talked about this 100 times. He also has a strategy, James, about what happens if he doesn't have renters for a while. Excuse me. What happens if he doesn't have renters for a while? Because if he doesn't have renters, now he's on the hook for all of these rents. So it could end up being this nasty cascade for him. So he's got a bigger emergency fund than the average person has, so he can withstand all these houses having 6 months of not paying. So he's had to do that for every house. For every house before he goes and does another one, he makes sure he's got 6 months of this person not pay him before he does the next person's.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up. I'm going to ask you a question, but first I'm going to preface this by I talk about the burn method a lot. I think it's a great method. Um, the the part I love that you brought up though is the reserves,
Mm,
because they say cash is king, right? The more cash you have, I'm a big proponent on 6 months of reserves, every single property minimum, and get that up before you buy another. So that's great. My question is, with you being so against debt for your personal life, if you had to choose between him doing it with debt and building this, because it essentially it's a business, he's building a business, building his income. If you had to choose between him doing it with debt or not doing it at all, what would be your stance on that?
I would do it with debt, but let's be clear. The only reason I do it with debt is because he has all these strategies, these what if strategies. Early in my life, when I got into debt, I had no strategy. I'm buying lunch at Ruby Tuesday for 6 of my friends or 5 of my friends, and I've got no idea how I'm going to pay that bill. Right. So I will sometimes do things with debt, but I always have the strategy to pay it back. And then also the, what if that doesn't work? If for some reason that strategy goes, so I want to have 2 different ways that I can make sure this gets paid off before I use the debt. So I would definitely use the debt.
Gotcha. Okay. And the reason I wanted to clarify that is because you come off very strong hating debt and realizing all debt is bad debt, which I somewhat agree with. I guess my wording is just a bit different, but you can still use it to build wealth. And I take that back to, you can use debt the right way in order to make money. You
Yeah.
can use crypto in somewhat of a right way to make people make money using crypto.
Right.
People make money using NFTs, but you have to understand the risks involved. If you have to understand, okay, if all goes to hell, I don't have renters for a year, the market tanks 40% in the housing market. You have to run through these scenarios of what you're going to do and be in a place, whether it's having more cash reserves or what other resources you have to be in a place to weather the bad times, because you know it and I know it. The bad times are coming, whether they're tomorrow, whether they're next year, whether they're in 5 years, whether they're they are coming one day. So it's not a good idea to buy it today and not be ready for the crash tomorrow. It's better to be ready for the crash today, buy it today, and whenever it comes, whenever a recession comes, whenever times get harder, you are ready.
Well, and that's in that point, 100% is why I talk about debt that way. It's because when I look at my audience, too often people don't have a healthy enough respect for debt, right? Before they take it out, which means I want to be a little more negative about it so that people go, oh, maybe I got to be a little more careful about that. Absolutely. I do the same thing later in the book. I have a chapter, I have a chapter later in the book called How to Get Rich Quicker, which is a salacious title on purpose, because I want people to read that chapter, because by the end of the chapter, what I hope people get is, yeah, I can get rich quicker, which could also make me poor quicker, and that you can get rich quicker. And here's how you do it. And here is exactly what the downside is when you do that. So everything has a downside. And this was a cool lesson about my 16 years in financial planning, was learning how to look at the downside ahead of time and make sure it's just a part of my strategy. It doesn't mean that I say, no, I'm not doing anything. Of course, I'm going to do stuff. I'm still going to take risks. But the more that I can minimize those risks, like if you watch professional poker players, it's amazing. Professional poker is much more about math than anything. Like these people are always doing the math. What's the probability here that I'm going to win? And the goal is to increase the probability of winning as much as I can. And the more plans I have, the more I understand what my downside is and protect against those, the higher I can increase the odds that I'm going to make this thing successful. And it's funny, like in the restaurant industry, as an example, you see that this is the number one place where people flush their money down the toilet. Everybody thinks that they can open up a restaurant, and you see that most restaurants fail right in the first 2 years. And so the probability of you having a successful restaurant is actually incredibly low. So number one, don't get into the restaurant industry. But if you are going to get into the restaurant industry, just how you design the layout of your tables and the light fixtures to create layers, and the sound design of the restaurant so it sounds busy but not overwhelming. It's funny because studies show, and restaurateurs who are really good at this know this, if you can increase the decibel level of the restaurant, people think that it's a better restaurant just by the decibel level. So it's funny, great restaurateurs are using something that you and I never think about to increase the odds that this restaurant's going to be successful. It isn't the food. It isn't the quote ambiance. It's the decibel. It's all those things, right? So my goal with emergency fund, with taking out debt, with investing is always, how do we increase our odds so that when we do this thing, we're going to win?
Yeah, I love that, because it's always, let's go with the probability over the possibility.
Yeah.
Always go with the
Yes.
which is most probable. And see, the thing about math, right? Math works 100% of the time if you do it right. With that being said, if a person is doing math when it comes to investing, whether it's in a stock, in a business, and whatever, if you do not calculate the risk into your equation, then your equation is wrong.
Yeah.
100% of the time.
Yeah.
So if you just do the math, say, if I get a renter in here for X, I'll make X amount a month and this, all that, that math might look fine. But if you did not calculate in any risk, if you did not calculate in the vacancy rates or the possibility of a pandemic, if you don't calculate these risks into your equation, then the math is wrong. And it's always going to be wrong until you factor it in. And that's something that debt does. You have to calculate in not only the debt itself, but the risks that associate themselves with the debt.
You know what I find, to your point, James, is a fun opportunity when it comes to debt, when you talk about your risk, is that I think part of that equation too, to us making sure that we have other strategies and other options and know what the risk is. And I think one risk that we don't think about is, and especially when you're buying a house, people look at a 15-year mortgage versus a 30 as an example. And I would have people tell me, I don't want a mortgage for 30 years, so I'm taking a 15. And when people tell me that, I realize they don't understand part of the math, which is the bank is laying out their terms, but outside of their terms, you can create your own payment schedule however the hell you want. So a CFO of a company, and this is the way I like thinking about my money, is if I'm a public company, for two reasons. Number one, a fun one. I think it's fun to have like a quarterly board of directors meeting. Like, just imagine if you've got to do your earnings call every quarter and tell your shareholders how you did, right? How would we spend money if we had shareholders in Joe company, every quarter? So I think that's fun. But the second thing is, a lot of people make these math-based decisions at work, and then they go home and they don't apply any math, and they use all emotions to make their decision. So let's think about this. Let's say I'm choosing between a 15 and a 30, and the interest rate has very little difference. What if I take the 30 so that if things go really bad in my life, I lose my job, I lose my other income streams, or I haven't developed them yet, I get disabled, something happens. Now I have a much lower payment every month that I'm required to do, but I calculate my own math to pay off the loan in 9 or 8 years or whatever that is. Now, if things go bad, I've got the 30-year protection of less money that I owe per month. But I know, because I make automatic payments to this mortgage every month, my automatic payments are based on paying it off in 8 years, not in 30. So now I'm not letting the bank dictate my terms, which is what 99% of us do. 15 or 30, which one do you want? Oh, I don't want a mortgage for 30. If you take a 30, you don't have to have a 30-year mortgage. I think that's a powerful part of the equation too.
Yeah, literally, like you said, like The bank is setting their terms. These are minimum terms you need to meet for this loan. You can take control and make your own terms. Just raise the bar. The bar is down here with the bank. Look, we want this minimum amount of payment for 30 years. If you set the bar above that, now if you don't make that, you're letting yourself down. Which I think letting yourself down is much worse than letting other people down.
Far worse.
So you're taking control over the terms. And I love that you say that, because it's something I hear listening to podcasts is like, oh, do the 30-year and pay it off in 30 years. It's like, no. Take the terms that the bank give you, the best terms for you, the best terms in the worst case scenarios, and then make your own terms. Stay committed to what you said you were going to do, and not the bar someone else set for you. I had Matthew on episode 15, and he's got a great quote I ended up clipping, is like, don't let others set the bar for you. Set the bar for yourself, because others will set the bar super duper duper low. When you set the bar for yourself, the sky is the limit. So
exciting. It makes it so much more fun, so much more exciting.
Exactly. So, all right, Joe, we're gonna get into the dirty part, man.
All right, it's about time.
We gonna get into the, and this is the part that every single listener needs to understand these two terms: inflation and taxes. If you don't know either one of those words, we're getting into it. And we're not going to get too deep into it, but we are going to break it down to the pure basics, and we're going to get it rocking and rolling. You have a whole chapter dedicated in your book to inflation and taxes.
Yeah.
And these are the biggest expenses most people will ever incur in their lifetime. That you will pay the most. It won't go to your housing. It won't go to your food. It'll go to taxes, and it'll go to inflation. So real quick, Joe, do you want to give like a rough, dirty definition of what inflation is?
Yeah. And I'd love to do it in a way that just makes people understand it very quickly. So we don't get into the terms that you'll get at Wikipedia or whatever. Here's the deal with inflation. Inflation is this number, the price of everything going up. I think everybody knows that. This is why inflation is important. And for me, this is the definition. If you are not kicking inflation's butt, you have to save dollar for dollar the same amount you're going to spend later. So think about how hard it is to live your life just today without that. If you want to have a year in the future and your money is just growing at the same rate that inflation is growing, that prices are going up, if your account equals that, you've got to only spend half of your money today and save the rest for a year later. And if you don't want to work for 35 years, who's going to be able to do it? Who can do that? You can't do that. So the key part about inflation is realizing that is the devil. And when people talk about safety, people go, hey, I don't invest in the stock market because it's not safe. I don't invest in crypto because it's not safe. But if your money is in a savings account, which some of it should be because of the emergency fund, like we talked about earlier, but if the vast majority of your money's there because you feel like it's safe and it's earning 0.05%, right? And inflation is at 7 right now, but it's normally at 3%. You are very safely getting your butt kicked. You are very safely losing money when it comes to the price of your stuff. So safety for me is investing in those asset classes that historically have beaten inflation, that are like the escalators going the right way instead of the moped going the wrong way. So 2 asset classes historically have done this over long periods of time. They're both rotten over short periods of time, wonderful over long periods of time. Stocks, meaning index funds, right, on the passive side, or buying a collection of stocks and having an actual strategy. But the stock market in aggregate has kicked inflation's butt over long periods of time. Almost equally is the real estate market. Real estate over long periods of time, as reflected by the North American Real Estate Investment Trust Index, called the NAREIT Index. One's done 10.5, the other one's done like 10.3 over long periods of time. They end up almost exactly in the same place. Stocks and real estate are the 2 ways to make sure that you don't have to save dollar for dollar. Then taxes. The deal about taxes is, think about this. even if you put money into tax shelter, people are like, oh, I avoid taxes by putting money in a tax shelter. Well, if I put money in a 401k at work, let's say this, pre-tax savings plan at work, and I put money in there, that 401k, James, is still a joint account. It's not joint with you and a spouse or joint with you and a family. It's joint with you and Uncle Sam. And the reason is, even though you don't pay any tax today, all that money that grows, that money you're going to have to pay tax on when you pull it out. So if it goes in pre-tax, you have to pay tax on it when you pull it out, which is why for most people using a Roth option is a better way to go. Because now it's only your money. When you put money, you're going to pay the tax man now, but all that interest it earns is just yours. It's not a joint account anymore. The frustrating thing about taxes is that taxes get taken away from us. If we work a W-2 job, we work a regular job where you get a paycheck, taxes are withheld. And I'll tell you, it was funny working with this doctor who made like $300,000 a year. And I took his tax form and I said, $300,000 you made. How much money do you think you paid in taxes? He goes, oh man, probably a lot, like $40,000. No, paid like $70,000 in taxes. So understanding how taxes work, how the tax system works, just basically, and the cool thing actually about taxes, we all get freaked out about taxes. We hire somebody else to do it because we don't want to know it. Take that tax form, which is 2 pages, and just learn what those 2 pages mean, like each line. And I will tell you, when somebody did that, which was only when I started getting my act together in the mid 90s, when I started getting my act together, I had a tax pro sit me down. I was a financial planner already. I had somebody sit me down and we went through those 2 pages. All of a sudden I got it. I got how a tax credit's better than a tax deduction. I understood what deductions meant. I understood the exemptions for kids, right? Now we get this money if we have kids. I understand where they all fall. I understand the fact that taxes are a graduated system. Like there might be somebody listening to this who goes, well, you know what, Joe, I don't go to work. My spouse works because we're in a high tax bracket and all my money would go to taxes. Yeah. And for people listening on the audio podcast, James is rolling his eye, but you hear this too. And I would tell
too often.
I would tell my clients, James, I would say, because you're going to love this. I would say, well, I got good news for you. You get to go to work because it doesn't work that way.
Okay. I'm going to write this down first before I forget. Okay. Let's go back for a second, because you go get me worked up with this tax thing, Joe. I'm telling you, go get me worked up, man. And,
that's okay. Mission accomplished.
Okay, so let's go back to inflation just for a quick second. I love how you kind of gave the generalized statement, like people think just because your money is in a bank, it's safe and nobody's touching it. It's not going to go anywhere. It's FDIC insured, and if the bank goes under, I get my money from the government, whatever, blah, blah, blah. That's all nice, all good. Everybody should have a savings, 3 to 6 months of expenses, no matter what. Everything else needs to be working for you. With that being said, I think I've figured out where the security comes from. I think I got it, because inflation is it's a hidden tax. Like, you don't know day to day what it is. It's just some number that the government throws out from research and development, or however that works. So with that being said, if you have $25,000 sitting in a bank account, that balance never goes down. The value does. So you can have it in there for 5 years and the balance is actually going to go up due to the 0.005 or whatever the savings account is paying you. So your balance is actually increasing. You're not losing any money, but the value that people don't see is what decreases. And I compare that to if you're putting $25,000 into a stock, you can physically see the value of that stock going up or down in conjunction with the balance. So not only is the value of each stock going up and down, you can visually see that, but the balance is also reflecting that. So I think if people could see the inflation, the 7% this year, that their $25,000 went down, it would scare them. It'd scare them more than the market does.
Wouldn't that be great if you had that line item on your bank statement? This is what your money buys versus a year ago.
Hey, banks, you hear it. You heard it first. Gen Z Money Podcast. Add it to the bank statement, the inflation for that month and what your balance, the actual buying power of the balance went down to. And that's all I really want to say about inflation. It just sucks that people who don't understand it are the ones that are getting their butt kicked on it.
Agreed.
Now let's go on to taxes. First of all, in the future, I am going to be having a CPA come on, guys, to go over the basics of taxes because I'm no tax expert. I don't think Joe is a complete tax expert. I'm going to bring on an actual professional to go through all the different taxes, all you're paying, and just have a big old 3 episode because it's a lot. With that being said, it's funny to me that you never can really know what your taxes are for anything. Meaning the IRS doesn't send you at the end of the year a tax bill and say, hey, this is how much we need. They wait for you to develop how much to pay them. Same thing for property taxes. They don't tell you at the beginning of the year, okay, at the end of the year, this is how much taxes you're going to need to pay us for this property. They don't. So it's up to you to figure out what your taxes are going to be year over year. With that being said, I love that you brought up the Roth IRA because when it comes to income taxes, I know this year what my income taxes are. I know they are 12%, 24%, whatever it is. I'd rather pay it now because when I'm in retirement, I don't know if I'm going to be in a 70% tax bracket. It's people who probably aren't even born yet are going to make that decision for me when it's retirement time. So I love the fact that I want to pay it now. I know what it is today. Therefore, I'm going to pay it today. Because if I don't pay it today, the taxes on my Roth contributions, someone else is going to tell me what to pay later. And it could be lower. That's a risk I'm willing to take. It could be 10% in the future when it's 20% today.
Yeah.
That's a risk I'm willing to take.
You know, what's funny is that tax experts will tell you, if you just do the math and you look at the national debt number climbing, that at some point that, speaking of math again, we'll bring math back in, the math says tax rates have to go up. Don't know when they go up, but they have to go up. One of two things have to happen. Either the currency gets devalued or tax rates go up. And both of those are ugly, but the less ugly of the two is expecting a higher tax rate. But even if it's the same, so let's say, okay, once again, we go back to worst case scenario. If it's the same, or even if it's a little lower, the fact that you get to defer the tax on all those earnings over time, especially if you start when you're young, right? I mean, you know, you look at Gen Z and how many years until you're going to use that Roth money. That's fantastic. That compounding interest thing is amazing.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I'm not going to get worked up on it because it's not worth getting worked up on, but what you said about, oh, I shouldn't go to work because it's going to bump us up another tax bracket. It's actually really sad to me. I hate, it breaks my heart when I hear people say things like that. Like, for example, my wife, she has been she's a registered nurse and they're only required to work 3 days a week, 36 hours. And she's been kicking butt for the last year, working 5 days a week, wow, putting in 60 hours a week because of course she wants to buy her first rental property and do all these things. And you have her coworkers who are older, which you would think that they're more experienced and understand. They say, wow, Dawn, if you work extra, they're just going to take more in taxes. It's yes, technically they will get more in taxes out of me, but they don't understand how the marginalized tax bracket works. They only, if I go up from the 12% to the 24%, it's not like all of my income is gone. All of the extra income I'm making is gone. It's just 24% of that top earned money. And it sucks because she comes home and, my wife believes me 100%. She understands that I know the basics and I know what I'm talking about for the most part. But sometimes, she's kind of skeptical. Hey, babe, I was talking to this older nurse that's about to retire at age 70. And, she was saying that I should be careful on how much I'm working because of taxes, blah, blah, blah. Are you sure we're on the right path? And I admire her for asking me just to check in and hold me accountable. But I'm like, okay, let's just look at, she's retiring at 70. Let's just say we're not on the same path. which means we have information that unfortunately she does not. But then I always tell her, like, look, if there's someone saying this to you at work, point them to my podcast, give them my number. I'll sit down and we will talk about it. Because if I could educate people and get them out of that mindset, like, oh, I'm not going to work more because they're going to take more in taxes. It's like, I'm not going to earn an extra dollar because I got to give away 25 cents of it.
Yeah.
It's like that logically, that makes no sense.
Yes.
And so
we went to it's funny you say that. We went to a Westwood One. We're part of the Westwood One radio network. We're not on the radio, but we joined that a couple of years ago. And the percentage I was going to have to share with them to be a part of that network was absolutely huge, right? It was absolutely huge. The amount of money that they take, when I see it every month, I want to throw up, James, to be very frank, I want to throw up. But I look at my income last year, it was way the hell higher than it's been doing podcasting. By the way, just an aside that James and I both know, if anybody gets into podcasting, you think you're going to get rich, you should go do something else.
That's a fact. Yeah.
You see these people, they've been doing it for 3 months and they're like, hey, how do I monetize? I'm like, oh no.
Maybe after 3 years.
Yeah. But anyway, and even then it's not why you do podcasting, but the analogy is I could have said no to this opportunity because they're taking more money, right? They're going to take a higher percentage of my money, which is true. When it comes to taxes, they take a higher number, but you still have more money. You still point blank have more money. So be smart about it. Know how you do it. We have an illustration in the book that I'll just share with everybody, which is it's this, you think about New Year's in those champagne glasses, and you've got like the big row of champagne glasses on the bottom, and then the next row on top of it, and they're sitting up. And let's say you crack open a champagne and you just pour it in that top glass, and you just keep pouring. And once that top glass is full, then it spills to the next ones. And then when those fill, it spills to the next ones, it spills to the next. That's the way taxes work. Your first tax rate for all of us is very low. And then the next dollar you earn, that next glass of champagne, which I love the champagne analogy because more money, champagne. And then we fill up the next one and we fill up. So it gets, the tax situation gets a little worse, but it's only on a graduated basis. So when
Exactly.
so
you're not taking the champagne out of the top glass to fill up the bottom glasses.
That's
right.
The
top glass stays full.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when somebody tells me, oh, I'm in the 28% tax bracket, so 28%, no, it doesn't. Because some of your money gets taxed at 10, some at 12, and so it goes up a little piece at a time.
Yeah. And that's for everybody. So it's like that. Let's say you're making, let's just call it $100,000 a year. Your first 24,000, if we're allowing for, let's just say the first 20,000 is taxed at 10%. That is never going to change. The next 20,000 is taxed at 15%. That is never going to change. The next 20,000 is taxed at 20%. That is never going to change. The taxes you pay on your income only changes at the top. So it always makes more sense to make more money. Yes, the more money you make, the more money you have to pay in taxes, but the percentage changes every single step of the way. And like I said, I'm going to have an episode completely dedicated to taxes because this is like if I had to pick one thing that people really did not understand or they had the misconceptions about the most, it's income taxes.
Yeah.
People don't understand is like, if you get a refund at the end of the year, more than you paid in, you didn't pay any taxes for that year. If your income was low enough, you paid no taxes. As a matter of fact, other taxpayers paid you for that year if you have children and things like that. So yeah, it's so misunderstood.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes when you get a refund, you did pay tax, but you just overpaid, right? And the money you got back as a refund was just the government hanging on to your money for 6 months or for whatever, because you just paid more than your fair share. So why do I want the government hold my money for like, of all the people I can pick to hold on to my money at a 0% interest rate? We were talking about debt earlier. The government had an interest-free loan from you that because you handed them extra money, and we look at it as a windfall. I'm taking the family to Cedar Point because I got this big refund check. You actually handed them your money early, demanded 0% on it. Now they're giving it back.
Yeah. And I always say, think about it like this. The government always wants a piece of everything you make. So when the government gives you a check and they don't expect anything in return, 9 times out of 10, it was your money to begin with. It was your money. So it's like, always be conscious of that. So, yeah. But okay, Joe, we're going to transition into the final questions of the podcast.
Oh boy.
These are the same questions that I ask every single guest, just to get to know you personally, man, and get to understand how you think. Are you ready?
This is my favorite part. Let's do it.
All right, Joe. First question. Everyone has their own definition of what it means to have financial peace. What is your definition?
Well, financial peace to me means I don't worry about my money, that I can worry about the things that I value in my life, the friendships I have, the things I want to do, and I can do it in a spot where I'm not where I was back in my 20s, where I didn't know how the hell I was going to pay for this. That to me is true financial peace.
And it's the thought of you'll never cry over money again.
Will not.
And that's powerful, man. That's powerful. I love you bring that up because that's a lot of people's reality, is like they do have these hard emotions when it comes to money. But once you get to a point where those emotions never come back up, it's kind of like I don't want to minimize, PTSD, but sometimes it can be PTSD with financial issues. When you've come to a point where you ran out of gas and you had 85 cents, like that's something you never want to go back to.
Well, and the good news is that in some cases, even if you have financial peace, if something takes you out of that peace, then there's a good reason for you to be worried, right? So as an example, we're talking about adding on to our house next year. And I had a lot of consternation about that because it's not something I could just go do. That's something I could just go do and not worry about it. So because of that, then I know that's a bigger financial planning issue that my wife and I need to talk about.
Exactly. But it's also not like the house is on fire and it's an emergency.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. So if there are listeners out there that want to start building wealth and they have no clue where to get started, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that just start. I thought about this one for a long time because, my first answer was it's education, but you get educated much faster when it's just in time education, meaning you're going to use it. So I hope people today, if you don't have an emergency fund or you're in debt, like today, you didn't just listen to the podcast, that you actually did something. Because I'll tell you that movement creates wonder. And it's funny. I this week, just to give you an idea, this week I was reaching for something in the cupboard and I knocked this olive oil container and I spilled it all over the floor. And so oil on this brick flooring thing I have, and the oil seeping into the little brick spots. I don't know what to do about that, James. Guess what I did? I went to YouTube and I watched a YouTube video and it worked. And you put vinegar in the water, never knew this, and it worked. So by actually spilling the olive oil, I created the situation where I was curious about something that was relevant right now. And now the next time I spill oil on my floor, I know exactly what to do. I would do the same thing. I would go just invest a little bit of money. I would go try to open a savings account. I would think about my values and I would timeline them out and see, how do these goals work against each other? And then that produces the thing of, okay, what investments historically got me to that spot? So, I would get going and the education will follow.
Yeah, I love that, man. And oftentimes, especially if you're in the financial independence or, financial podcasting area, you hear about these people who are saving 50% of their income, 60% of their income, 80% of their income. And it's nice to have that, like realize that that's possible. But you also have to look at, they did not start there. When you started paying off debt, you didn't start throwing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. You probably started with 20 or 40 or $1. So it's like getting started. I did on episode 2 of the podcast, I talked about compound interest, and I put it in a calculator. If you just decide to save $1 a day for 30 years and you invested $1 a day, everyone can afford $1 a day. You'll end up with a little less than $150,000 at the end of that 30 years. You don't have to start with $500 a month for a Roth IRA. You don't have to start with $100 a month. You don't have to start with, you just have to start. You literally just have to start with anything.
It's actually funny that you say that, because when I started podcasting, it was very similar. I sat down with a friend of mine who created Bigger Pockets, which you will know is a great community for real estate investors. Josh Dorkin is his name. And Josh showed me when I was a new podcaster, we were at a great conference called FinCon, and he sat down next to me and we were chatting. And just the fact that he was taking me under his wing a little bit when he'd been doing this for a long time and I was brand new was pretty great. I spent half my time going, I can't believe I'm talking to Josh Dorkin. And, but we start talking about downloads and the number of people listening to our show. And he shows me his graph, James, and holy cow, right? I mean, I had maybe 70 to 100 listeners listen to a show, and he's showing me 40,000 people at that time, which, by the way, they're way, 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 way beyond that now. They're in hundreds of thousands of listeners to every episode now to Bigger Pockets. But I remember seeing that and going, whoa, man. And he literally, and I'll tell everybody this, when it comes to your money stuff, when people share those 50, 60, 70% of what they're saving, he put his arm around me and he goes, don't compare your beginning to my middle, which is very powerful. Completely to your point, save $5, save what you can and get the beginning going. But don't look at these people saving 70% of their income and go, I can't do that. You will.
But it's a fact. You cannot do that. You cannot do that right now.
Right.
But you have to start somewhere.
Don't compare yourself, because that will rob you of all the joy of all this stuff.
I tell you what, Josh Dorkin, he's an amazing speaker. I've listened to a couple of his talks, and that saying, man, don't compare your beginning to my middle. Like that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And that's why that's one of the reasons I decided to start this podcast now, because in so many words, I am still in my beginning, not only of this podcast, but also of my life, my financial independence journey. So it's a lot easier to relate to James, who has 2 rental properties under his belt, than to James, who has 50 rental properties or 500 rental properties.
Right.
And now I can say, go listen to episode 1 of the podcast. Listen to where I started. Like, you're a lot closer to where I started than where I will be in 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I have another on that point, another podcasting mentor, a guy named Roman Mars, who makes a great podcast called 99% Invisible. It's an NPR podcast. And he told me one time, he said, I'm embarrassed by the shows I made a year ago. And this is a guy who made phenomenal podcast a year before he told me this, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, I'm embarrassed by the shows I made a year ago. And I hope like hell a year from now, I'm embarrassed by the podcast I'm making now. And I think that's the same thing about our money. Not to be embarrassed. The word embarrassed, I think there's misplaced, but it kind of shows your journey. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Start where you are, do the best that you can with what you have. Hopefully a year from now, you're looking back at yourself a year ago going, oh, how cute. I was dealing with all these little things, and now I'm dealing with stuff that's way, way bigger. And hopefully next year I'm dealing with stuff that's even bigger than that, because it gives you a growth mentality. And, you know, I think what social media has taught us, and this is a whole different rabbit hole, but I think social media has taught us that we got to be right all the time. Instead of walking in and saying, how am I wrong? Or what don't I know? We walk in having to defend BS points of view when we don't know everything. And so we have these silly fights about money management, about politics, about the way that we live our lives. And I have to be right. I have to defend them because I'm right. What if I'm not right? What if I don't know everything? I think if I walk into a room and I'm like, tell me what I don't know, fill my brain with stuff I don't know, it's such a better way to live too.
Yeah. And it's just, The saying you just said about, 1 year ago, I cannot think of an aspect in life that you shouldn't think that way. You
Right.
should look at your marriage a year ago and say, man, I was stupid a year ago. You should look at your money and say a year ago and say, wow, I was doing way worse a year ago. I think it's every single aspect of your life. You should always be able to look back and like, man, I made some stupid choices back then, because that is the growth. Being able to look back and say, I wasn't the perfect guy. I thought I knew everything.
Dude, he blew me away when he said that. Like that was, I had I mean, he told me that 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and still today, it is something that I live by and I remember all the time. And they're actually, you know what? There's another thing for people listening there. The last two things. I just mentioned two people that were influential to me, and great people and people further ahead on the journey. It goes back to the advice that I gave early in this show, which is once I learned to surround myself with the right people further ahead on the journey, things started working better. It was more fun. I didn't think I was right all the time. I learned a ton from the right people. That is something you should all try to do. Just surround yourself with that, because, if not, if you don't do that, you're still going to be surrounded by people. So deciding not to do that or not making a move is still making a move. You're still getting this input. So you can either decide what the input is, or you can just let it happen. And I think that's a powerful lesson.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about it all the time. Like, your network is your net worth.
Oh yeah.
And so you should always be striving to surround yourself with people who are doing what you want to be doing in the places it's being done. So I love that, man. I love that.
Yeah.
So if there's one thing you could advise everyone to avoid doing to build wealth, what would it be, Joe?
Think that the problem is just more education. I think that people use education sometimes as a crutch, and I'm not saying don't get educated. I think, listening to this podcast would be fantastic. Reading books is fantastic. Watching YouTube is fantastic, but it's not about the education. It's about what you do with the education. And too often, James, I have met broke professors. And by broke professors, what I mean, and there's a lot of malice in this comment, because I've learned so many people that know everything about every flipping thing, but they haven't done anything. Like I had this guy at a party I was at, who was telling me about day trading, and he was talking about reading technical charts. And I just told him, I'm like, yeah, well, I don't do that. That's not my strategy. I know that there's people that do. I've read some books about people that are phenomenal at that. Not part of what I do. So he was emphatic that what I had to do was follow this upside down teacup thing that appears in graphs where, a stock will go up like the cup, and then you got that little cup handle, the teacup handle or the coffee cup handle, and it goes down. So it goes up and it goes down, but then it does another little loop, right? And it's that second loop when it's finally going to take off. So you don't trade on the first one, you wait for the handle, and then you do it. And I just looked at him and I said, this is fantastic. Like I'd never heard of it before. Now I've heard of it a lot, right? That traders do that. But at the time I hadn't heard of it. I'm like, this is fantastic. How much money are you doing this with? And you know what his answer was? None. He was getting ready to start. He's like, oh man, I've been watching it and I'm getting ready to start. Knowledge without action is nothing. So don't just sit here and listen to the podcast and turn it off and then listen to the next episode. You have to avoid thinking, because it is just procrastination. I think that just telling yourself I need more education before I start is procrastinating. Go do it.
I love that. I was speaking with Mike. I think he came on episode 14, if I remember right. And he illustrated it great. It's like there is tons and tons and tons of information out there, but you don't want just information. You want wisdom.
Oh, that's good too.
He compared it to like any of us can go on WebMD, type in our symptoms, and come up with a diagnosis.
Yes.
We all still go to the doctor because we need the wisdom. We need somebody who's seen this come in 3 times and realize, you know what? the symptoms you have, it could be this, but it could also be these three things.
Right.
You might have all of the information at your fingertips in this computer in your pocket, but it's the wisdom. If you implement information without wisdom, that's when you tend to fail the most.
I'm laughing because you said WebMD. I go on WebMD and I figure out that I'm going to die in the next week.
Yeah, exactly. That's implementing the information without the wisdom.
Right.
I think we've all been there, man.
I got all these things.
Like I see a bump on my arm. I'm like, oh, I got chickenpox V3, man.
It's over.
Yeah.
Make sure the will's done. Right.
But yeah, when he said that, it was like, man, that and it's the same thing you just said, man. It's like, it is literally when you implement information without wisdom, it's when things tend to fall apart, because everybody knows what to do until they get punched in the face. Yeah. Everybody is a professional stock picker in a long bull market. But as soon as that recession hits, or as soon as that pullback hits and you get punched in the face and your portfolio drops 40%, now what? If you have no wisdom to understand what to do in those circumstances, then you're right back to your analysis paralysis. Or
I like about that. I like about that analogy about being punched in the face too, is that it isn't just getting in the ring. It's how you react when this negativity hits, when these bad things happen, right? What do I do? As an example, your portfolio is down 40%. Wisdom is I have a investment policy statement that I work from, and I implement this into my machine. If it's something I haven't seen before, I go learn about it. I create a machine that then makes sure that not just this time it goes down 40, but the next time it goes down 40. Or is there a way that I should have avoided 40? Like, I start asking all these questions. But the funny thing about a great restaurant, going back to restaurants, is, and studies show, great customer service becomes sublimely phenomenal customer service in customer recovery mode. Meaning, when you're pissed at a brand because it isn't doing anything for you, or they mess something up, people become the strongest advocates for a brand when the brand messes up, and then the brand brings you back. The brand handles the problem, because everybody recognizes there's going to be a problem, right? So it's the way that the brand handles it that takes these people that were almost about to walk out the door. Instead, they become the biggest advocates. I think it's the same here. So, and I think getting that wisdom that you talk about is getting punched in the face. Like, don't be afraid of getting punched in the face. I would go do it. I would get punched in the face. And then I go, okay, am I going to stagger around, or I'm going to figure out how to not make that happen? Life is going to punch you in the face. And I think it's what you do with that. That's the powerful thing.
Yeah. That's phenomenal. The example you just used with essentially customer retention. Cause it's even in my own life, it's like, I understand companies make a mistake, but if I call them and they just don't respond ever again, and I'm an upset done. But if I call them and say, hey, look, this messed up, they're okay. So how can we solve it? Would you like us to come back out? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, wait a minute. This is a good company.
Yes.
This is because not only they own up to the mistakes they made, or even mistakes I made, but they're willing to work to resolve that. So, and I'm thinking it back to like instances in my life where I may have had those hiccups with different companies or whatever. And the best companies are the ones that we came to a resolution in the end that made both of us happy.
Yeah. They didn't not mess up. They messed up and they had a phenomenal response. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I care more. I tend to recommend and care more about the people who messed up but responded in a proper way than the people who just did it right the first time.
Isn't that funny?
It's crazy. I'm thinking about that's not right. It's not right, but that's just how. That's why it's like it hit me like when you said that. It's like, wow, that's a crazy phenomenon that I kind of want to look more into. It's like,
yeah, right.
Why do I care and trust the people who failed and righted their failure than the people who didn't fail at all?
But you're the average person. We all do that.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. On episode 15, Matthew said something. I'm not sure. I didn't look into it, but he said like Warren Buffett, he doesn't invest with people in businesses that haven't failed at least twice. And it's like, why do you trust the businesses who failed twice and then became successful more than the businesses who just became successful?
That's interesting.
That it is interesting. And I'm not sure if it's accurate. I didn't look into it, but it makes sense to me. It's like, because the things that the business owner who's failed twice, the lessons he's learned, the things he's gone through, provides more wisdom than the person
Sure.
who just started and have had a high horse ever since.
Well, he can also see how those people respond under pressure, you know?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, that's just, man, you got me thinking now, man. All right, Joe. So if there's someone out there that doesn't believe they can reach financial peace due to their age, religion, race, sexual orientation, etc., what would you say to change their mind?
Well, and I thought about, this was the one I thought about second most, because this is a powerful thing. And we talk about it on Stacking Benjamins all the time, about the fact that, and this is not what people want to hear, but it's not fair. And the system is rigged. And I can't change your mind. I can't. There is nothing I can do that will tell me that a rich white person growing up in an upper class neighborhood in a school system that's supposedly a public school system where it's supposedly all the same is gonna not have it a hell of a lot easier than some of my friends that grew up in, and I was in Detroit, that grew up in Detroit in the Detroit school system, which has had so many problems. It isn't fair. And it isn't fair because of all those different reasons that you've talked about. There's so many frustrations. So what I will say is, I can't change your mind about the system, but I can change your mind about the fact that you can't do it. Because like my friend John Hope Bryant, who has done so much fantastic work for people of color, and he's one of my favorite people to talk to, because he talks about how when everybody wins, these and I love his phrasing. This is not my phrasing, it's his phrasing. He's like, you can be as prejudiced as you want to be, but when you realize that you will have more money if you let those people you're prejudiced against win too, you can still have whatever belief you want. He goes, the real color is green, right? And if we bring everybody along, we all get more green. So be whatever kind of jerk you want to be, whatever. But I'll just echo him by saying, because this is also his quote, that it isn't fair, but that means you just have to work harder. You can't give up. It does mean it's going to be harder. And then John says, and I totally believe this, even with my situation that is partly privileged, being in a, being from a middle-class family and having some things that our people haven't had, the things that I had to fight through, there's value in the fight. There's value and there's knowledge in the fight. So I'd say this, I think a little more nuanced, James, maybe than you were expecting, which is the game's rigged. It is rigged, but that doesn't mean that you can't try. You need to try. And there's power in trying.
I 100% agree with you, man. I like to just use the saying, it's like, you might have had a race where there were no obstacles. I might have had a race that there were 2 obstacles, and you might have a race out there that you have 10 obstacles. I don't care. Okay. I don't get to pick how many obstacles I have on my race. I'm still going to run it, and it's up to me to finish. Therefore, it's up to you to finish your race. Yes, it's harder, but that means you deserved it more. That means you wanted it more. I'm going to look at you and say, look at all the things that you overcame to get to where I am. I'm going to admire you more.
I admire people that could just make it to the starting line, right? Ooh. I mean, some of the things people get to the starting line. By the way, for people that aren't watching this, they're just listening, they won't see that. While James is talking, I was searching for this book that I keep by me all the time, which I found a year ago, because I get inspired by these little things. And this is a book by a great writer named Rebecca Solnit, and it's called Cinderella Liberator. And it's the story of Cinderella that Rebecca writes. By the way, the cool thing that she did, she took this artist from the 1930s and got permission from his estate to use these black and white photos. And she put them all through her book, because she loves this guy, Arthur Rackham's pictures from the 1930s. And he's long passed away, but it's just a neat collaboration. Anyway, This book, Cinderella Liberator, everybody knows the Cinderella story. The book I love because Cinderella in the book gets all these opportunities. She gets the opportunity to learn how to cook. She gets the opportunity to learn how to clean, and she gets the opportunity to learn how to deal with adversity, where the two stepsisters Cinderella feels bad for because they never got any of those opportunities. They never once did. And it's such a funny retelling of the Cinderella story where Cinderella gets all the good stuff and the wicked stepsisters and her wicked stepmother, who clearly was just misguided. In the book, these women are just misguided, and they're not as lucky as she is. Like, what a great way to look at Cinderella's life. And by the way it ends, the book ends, not to spoil the ending, but one thing that made me laugh, she goes, Cinderella and the prince got married and lived happily ever after. And then there's a line break and it says, not to each other. They both got married to other people, but they did live happily ever after.
I love it. And guys, I will link a link that you guys can purchase and read the book down in the show notes below. Cinderella Liberator. Yeah.
It's just a really thin picture book, but it is, I keep this close to me because every time I look at adversity, I remember Cinderella.
Yeah, I love it, man. It's a great message. It really is a great message. So Joe, where can people find out more about you?
Yes. We have the Stacking Benjamin show that we totally have to have you on, James. You got to mix it up with our roundtable, man. I think you'd have a great time. It's called the Stacking Benjamin show. It's every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, wherever you're listening to finer podcasts like James' podcast. The big thing is, though, we have the book Stacked, Your Super Serious Guide to Modern Money Management. Obviously, there's a lot of joking around, which is what we do at the Stacking Benjamin show. It is meant to be fun and funny. The guide is actually, it's a mix of the Hardy Boys Detective Manual that I carried around when I was in 4th grade meets the Cub Scout Wolf Guide. Like, that was the idea. And when we were selling Penguin Random House on the idea for this, my co-author and our agent, it's funny because I'm on this Zoom call because it's in the middle of COVID. I'm like, okay, I want to take the Hardy Boys Detective Manual and I want to combine it with the Cub Scout Wolf Guide for gamification, but I want to make it for adults and about money. What do you think? And I was sure, James, that I was sure the Zoom call was going to hang up right away. Right. So the number of cool people that were behind it. And by the way, we ended up with, we have the same editor as James Clear, who did the hot book, Atomic Habits. That's our editor for this book. So it's been great. You can get the book. I recommend getting it from your library if you're just starting on your journey. You can't do what I did with the detective manual. You can't dog ear it, and carry it around everywhere, but do this, get it from your library, read the early chapters, and then use some of the money to buy it. So you can then dog ear it and fill out all the achievements in the book and go back for the lessons. Last thing is, we're going around the country, going to 40 cities around the country. So you'll find out when we're coming to your city at stackingbenjamins.com/stacked. And sometimes it's libraries, independent bookstores, microbreweries, depending on the city. Sometimes we're going to be hanging out, having beers together and just chatting with a bunch of money nerds. Every city I go to, I'm trying to get all the money influencers I know in that area to come party with us. So you should be able to meet a lot of your favorite money personalities and maybe learn some new ones if you come on and hang out with us. So that all begins March 1st, and we'll be on the road through mid-June. So
that's awesome, man. I hope you come to a city near me so I can show up, man. Of course, guys, I will be linking his podcast in the show notes. I'll be linking his book in the show notes, and I will also be linking his website with his city tour so you can see if they're coming to a city near you. And you guys got to understand, if you are listening to this podcast, it's not just me out there. There are hundreds, thousands of people who will give you great information. I've never been a proponent of listen to one guy, do everything he says, and you'll be successful. I think you find the most success when you take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and you mold it to your personal life and how it fits you. That's why it's great to listen to like the Stacking Benjamin podcast or Gen Z Money or Dave Ramsey's show or Grant Cardone's podcast or all these different influencers and take what works for you and implement it. So I think showing up to this book tour and meeting all these different people, you're going to get so many different perspectives, and some of them might clash. Some guy might be a crypto day trader and the other is a buy and hold real estate guy, but
you get to watch them duke it out. You can watch them duke it out. Yes. And what better TikTok video will that be than watching a couple money nerds have a slap fight?
Exactly. You will get so many followers if you record and upload, man. But Joe, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I'm going to have a bunch of great stuff linked in the show notes below. You hit on a lot of great things. I really hope that you have the best book tour, and I hope it goes well. And I hope you so much positivity on growing your podcast, getting these books out there and educating people, because I think you're doing a great job, man. I really do.
Well, thanks a lot. And likewise, it is, I'm honored that you asked me to come on, and really excited to see as this podcast just keeps doing great things, like to see where you go. So congratulations on all your success so far.
I will tell you this, like I've tried many things. I've tried many things that I used to like. I used to stream video games. I used to, do all these other things that brought me somewhat passion, but nothing has brought me the level of happiness and passion that this podcast has up to this point. I mean, the people that are reaching out to me, asking such great questions, the people I've been able to interview up to this point, it's really, I'm not going to say it's shifted my mindset, but it's definitely had me reevaluating not only my personal stance, but the information I'm putting out to other people. So I really, really do enjoy putting out this information, especially putting it at the fingertips for free for people who actually need it.
Well, so, and obviously you can tell. You can tell. Yeah. I
appreciate that, man.
I wish you were excited about this.
Well, all right, Joe, man, we are going to get up out of here. Again, I really appreciate you coming on. This has been a little bit longer show, but you know what, man, everything was just phenomenal, man.
And I just looked at the time. I can't believe we spent that long. It feels like 10 minutes. That's good.
It's been great, man. It's been a great conversation. So I hope you have a great rest of your day, man. And I wish you the best of luck and everything. And hopefully I can have you on in the future to get an update and more. Hopefully you got more books coming for us, man.
I think one's going to be enough.
I feel that, man. All right. Later, Joe.
All right. Talk to you later.
And guys, that was Joe from the Stacking Benjamin podcast. Like I told you guys in the beginning, man, he brought some heat. He brought some fire. It's obvious that he's been doing this for multiple years, and so I like to learn from people who've been in the game longer than I have. What do I know, right? I'm 23. I'm learning every single day. I'm a lifelong learner, and I learned so much talking to him, and it helped me kind of adjust my mindset on things, because I don't like to be stuck in one way, especially when someone comes along and they end up, offering other types of solutions. I love his idea on debt, even though we don't agree 100%. We agree on a lot, but I love his opinion on that. I love the whole budgeting Tetris. I mean, these are all awesome concepts. Like I said, you guys can find it in his book that I'm going to link down in the show notes below. But I really think, and it's a fun read, guys. It's got a bunch of interactive tools that you can go in there. You can write your goals down. You can play with it. And it's just an amazing thing. Listening to his podcast he puts out, I mean, his whole team, they come together and they put out some amazing stuff. And I am going to try my best to make it to Atlanta to go up and meet up with him in person, man, and just have a good time. If there's some things that you guys would like me to go into on further episodes, like I am going to try and bring on a tax expert. I haven't found a good fit yet. Of course, I really want to go on a whole episode on inflation, how to combat it, what it is. Even though we went kind of deep into it this time, I want to do that in the future also. But with that being said, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. As of course, I just want to remind you guys, I do offer one-on-one financial coaching sessions that you can find and schedule in the show notes down below. And that's where we just team up and we get one-on-one with your finances and we make a plan tailored specifically for you. Because guess what, guys? Personal finance is personal, right? If you can't get all of the value you need out of the free podcast, then I'm more than willing to give you my time in order to get you where you want to be, right? Because if you're not moving forward, you're staying still. But I'm going to get up out of here, guys. I'm your host, James Bowman. And always remember, you're only as secure as your ability to perform. So spend your life accumulating assets that can perform for you. Later, guys.